Hello and welcome back to ATA's EconChat, brought to you by the Australian Taxpayers Alliance. I am your host, John Humphreys, and this is our weekly roundup, our casual and interactive chat about the interesting things of economics and politics from the last week. It's casual, as in unscripted. I don't know what I'm going to say from second to second, and it is interactive in that I welcome you all to contribute in the comments. Speaking of which, I'll send off the hello message. That should be going through soon. If you are following, this is streaming to the ATA, the Good Source, and my personal accounts on YouTube and Facebook. If you are in any of those, you would be hopefully watching us now. If you are, feel free to jump in, say hi, and as we go, we will get a Tim. And as we go, we will take questions, comments, criticisms. There's a few interesting things we're discussing today, worthy of comment and debate and exploration. So I hope you'll join me in that dive. We're going to be talking about the national accounts. I know that sounds dry, but this is about whether Australia is trending to recession or not. G'day, Lyndon. Good to see you back again. So that's national accounts, and the big one, the energy policy that is floating around now from the Albanese Labor government. And will it work? How will it work? And if not that, then what? That is the tough question, I think. You know, spoiler, their policy isn't great. But then once you've said that, people are going to quite reasonably ask, well, what to do next? And that is a tough one. So we're going to talk about that. And then the New South Wales government wants to get rid of rental bidding, a small little one. You know, today's EconChat is brought to you by the words price control, both at the energy level and the New South Wales rents, and a bit of discussion of politics and especially about New South Wales. Speaking of which, I see a message already in about it. I don't screen these, so I have no idea what's coming up, so bear with me. Stephen writes, you're from Danistan. I'm very sorry to hear it. But any chance of Lib Dems making friends with the shooters police that just quit? I'm not from New South Wales, so it would be me speaking out of turn. I don't actually know the gentleman that quit. I was going to talk about that later today. But we will. It seems like conversations are worth being had, regardless of whether they pan out or not. It's always good to talk to people. It's always good to be friends with, regardless of what's happening. Now, as I've done for the last couple of weeks, I wanted to start by having a little look at some stats, just keeping up to date with the latest economic information floating around. And often that takes us to the ABS, the Australian Bureau of Statistics. And the big thing from there in the last week, since I saw you last, was the release of the national accounts. Yes, thank you, Barclay. Appreciate it. If you stick around for a while in the second half of this chat, might get Barclay on to share his wit and wisdom with the huddled masses. But before we do that, let's have a look at what stats we can, what we can make of the recent release. So the government, or the ABS, which is the Government Statistics Bureau, release the national accounts every quarter, so every 3 months. And they just released the September quarter. So this covers the economic information for July, August, September. Those 3 months, that's that third quarter of this calendar year. And this is the key metric. This is what we're talking about when we're talking about economic growth or GDP. This is how we measure recessions until the Biden administration recently tried to fake a new definition to trick people. Everywhere else in economics, the world, and same corners of political commentary, a recession had been known as 2 quarters of negative GDP growth, as shown in the national accounts. So quite an important set of documents, quite an important set of data that we can unravel. And so I wanted to unravel it a little bit with you here. It can be a bit strange to look at. I want to start with, by the way, I should mention this. I told you unscripted, so I get this stuff wrong. I'm supposed to tell you, please like and subscribe. If you're on any of those channels before, on the ATA, on the Good Source, or my personal John Humphreys YouTube or Facebook, please like this video. Please subscribe to the YouTube channels. Please go and subscribe to me on Rumble as well, and share it. Let's share this around so we can have a bit of a broader conversation and more people can ask questions or tell us that they think we're wrong, and we can have a good argument with that deviation. National accounts. So the headline was that the Australian economy grew. You may remember last week, if you were with us last week, I talked about, I wonder if I can, sorry, give me 1 second. I'll see if I can set this up so you can still see me. There you go. They can still see me. You may remember last week, I talked about what looked like a looming recession. Now, I'm not shying away from that. The data we're looking at here was the data for July, August, September. The data I was quoting last week was data that was coming out in September, October, November. So I do think we are trending towards darker times. But the data that came out for the September quarter does show economic growth. The headline was it showed 0.6%. Seasonally adjusted change volume. Don't worry about that. This is the headline number, the 0.6% contribution to GDP. Now, actually, some people would say, well, but didn't prices rise during the same time? Yes. But this 0.6 is real growth. So that's the real growth. Real in economics means adjusted for inflation. Nominal is before you adjust for inflation. And it actually shows you here what the nominal growth was. So the nominal growth was 0.8%. And the adjusted for the change in prices, both domestic, which is quite a high, the CPI, but also international to the degree that we trade, so the terms of trade. Adjusted for the relevant prices, the Australian economy grew by 0.6%. Now, that's what everyone reports. That's what you'll see in the media. That's all the talking heads. I think this is the wrong stat. When I say I think it's the wrong stat, it's the wrong stat, right? What matters when we're talking about recession, we're talking about hard times, falling on hard times. You expect your disposable income to be going backwards, jobs to be disappearing. They're hard times. What matters is the quality of life. And putting aside the problems with GDP, and there are problems with GDP as a measure, but that's not what I'm talking about here. I'm talking about if GDP simply went up because you had more people, that's not real growth, right? And if GDP just went down because you had fewer people, then that doesn't mean you actually got poorer. What matters, surely, what matters isn't GDP, but rather GDP per person, or in economic jargon, GDP per capita. So I would strongly suggest, I would insist that if you want to talk about going into a recession in terms of how it impacts people, what matters is not how real GDP changes, but how real GDP per capita changes. And while the headline figure here is 0.6, the GDP per capita, it's still not a recession. There was still growth. But as you'll see here, just pointing to the relevant part of this, I think you can see where I'm highlighting. Yes, you can, is 0.4. So that's the real number. You'll see once you adjust for population change, and that's the relevant thing that's going on here that isn't captured in the GDP stats. Once you adjust for population change, you'll see that we did still improve. We still got slightly richer in that quarter, but a little less richer than the headline statistics show. So I think that's very worthwhile. Sorry, throwing my notes everywhere. That's very worthwhile keeping in mind. Next thing, I think, and this is a pet peeve of mine going through. So a lot of this is, feel free to have a look if you like, just abs.gov.au, lots of information. This is the quarterly growth rates. You can see big decrease when the COVID lockdowns first hit, big bounce back to get that, bouncing back from that loss. Another negative quarter with more lockdowns and a big bounce back. And now we're sort of trickling along again. But my next pet peeve is this comment here. And I rant about this one a lot. I'll try to be brief this time, but I'm sure I'll say it again. I'll read it here. Domestic final demand contributed 0.6 percentage points to GDP growth. No, it didn't. Now, I'm not saying they got their stats wrong. I'm saying they've misunderstood how they're describing this. Now, in macroeconomics, and yes, this is a little macroeconomics lecture. I can't help myself. That's part of the point of these live streams. Please indulge me. In macroeconomics, there's the concept of aggregate supply, all of the stuff you produce in a country, and then aggregate demand. Who gets that stuff? So that's roughly how you think of it. Aggregate supply. Yes, Elizabeth, true. I get excited about giving economics lectures. What can I say? Aggregate supply is the question, how much can you produce? And that's where growth comes from. That's where more productivity comes from. That's what more productivity contributes to. if a country is to get richer, you need to produce more stuff. There has to be more stuff. Aggregate demand is still an interesting and important concept, but aggregate demand tells you once the stuff has been created, and keep in mind, it's the creation of that stuff that is crucial. It's the creation of more stuff that is growth. Once that stuff is created, aggregate demand tells you how it's divvied up, which is a very interesting question. It's what the national accounts are all about. It's measuring, it's generally shown in aggregate demand terms. And we're going to go through it here. But what can happen is because we often describe GDP in aggregate demand terms, some economists and nearly all journalists make the mistake of thinking that aggregate demand is driving the change in GDP. It is not. What drives the change in GDP is we produce more stuff. It's the only thing that can drive long-term GDP growth. Produce more stuff. And the only way to do that long-term, there's two fundamental causes. Well, three if you count having more people, but then if you do GDP per capita, that becomes irrelevant. So the only two long-term drivers of greater prosperity, more investment and more innovation. Investment and innovation. And those two things drive productivity growth, and we've talked about that before. So that it is the supply side that creates the growth. The demand side simply tells you who gets it, who gets the trinkets. And they've made the mistake here is saying they've noticed that a bunch of consumers got the trinkets, and they've interpreted that as saying that consumers buying things has created the growth. No, buying things doesn't create growth. Making more things creates growth. And look, it seems like an unimportant quibble, but making that mistake in language drives a lot of poor economic policy. I would say it's a fundamental part of the misunderstanding that causes a lot of people to end up as unreconstructed Keynesians, is that fundamental mistake. So I urge you not to make it, and I chide these guys for making it. So they are right that when we divvied up the economic growth for that quarter, 0.6 percentage points increase in output ended up going to consumers, but that would be the right way of describing it. So let's go down to that. Let's look at, we can carve up GDP in three different ways. And the most common way of carving it up is by expenditure, which is to say broadly the different categories. If you're an economist, you may have heard of Y equals C plus I plus G plus NX. So Y, GDP, the total output of a country, is equal to the total consumption plus the total investments plus the total government spending and plus net exports. So plus exports minus imports. So there's four different categories. And we can see when we had this economic growth, where were those products going? So where did it go, this extra product? And we can see here that, remember, we had about 0.6. All of these numbers don't adjust for per capita. I say we should, they don't. So it's the 0.6 growth for that quarter. And we can see that basically just came from, that's basically that increased GDP went to consumers. That's where it went. You can see it did not go in increased investment. There was no increased investment, which, should be a bit of a worry. Consumption is not a driver of future growth. Investment is. So that's the first thing to note here. That is the 0.6 numbers, right? Just the way they interpret it's wrong. Another way you can divvy up the GDP stats is to ask the question, well, who gets richer? Who is getting richer? So this is, who gets the stuff, who gets the trinkets. But as the economy got bigger, who gets richer? And we can put that into three different categories. Was it workers? Was it investors? Or was it bureaucrats and politicians, the government sector? And you can see here, and this is quite something to look at, where did this GDP growth, who got richer because of it? Workers. The compensation to employees increased by 3.2% in that quarter, contributing more than, I'm not going to explain how to interpret that. Let's just say it contributed more than the total change. So it was, the benefit went to workers. And it wasn't that investors didn't make any more profit. It's that they actually made less, right? There is a decrease here in the return on capital. So the profits went down, wages went up by more in total, and then tax went up. So workers got more, the government got more, investors got less. So there's a few little things to worry about here. I know the number was still positive, and that's nice. But looking to the future, I did say last week, I think we're trending towards a recession. And a few little things to note here that should give you pause, that the profits are going down when you break up GDP by income. Last way you can break up GDP is by products, like what sort of things did you produce? And you can have a look at that later at your own time if you are curious. The last thing I wanted to note about with the GDP stats is, of course, Australia as a country, we announced the GDP of the country, but the different states go in different directions. And there's a little interesting thing here. If you split up the states, you'll see here, Victoria, 0%. 0% GDP growth, or it's GSP, gross state product, when you talk about states. Now, remember, if you factor in increased population, this means per capita, Victoria went backwards. And South Australia, 0.1, it is very likely that per capita, South Australia went backwards. So Victoria and South Australia could already be at the start of a recession. Now, the other states have done better. Queensland has done quite well, and Tassie and Northern Territory have done quite well, although that makes up a small part of the country. But yes, this is an interesting little tidbit. When you break up the national accounts, it could be that Victoria is already on the edge of their recession. Anything else interesting to look at here? That's probably enough. There was one other thing I was thinking of talking about, but I can't actually. It's not showing up here. Expenditure aggregates. Oh, yes, this is it. Thank you for your indulgence. GDP, I mentioned this last time. GDP is not a perfect measure, but it's better than nothing, right? It's better than just ignoring it, to pay attention to it. There was a smart-ass quip made a while ago that there's only 3 problems with GDP. It stands for gross domestic product. There's only 3 problems with using gross domestic product. It's gross, it's domestic, and it's a product. And the argument there is it's a smart-ass comment, but there's some truth to it. It's gross, which means you don't factor in depreciation. You can fix that by making it net. It's domestic, as in you're only looking at what's produced in Australia. You're not looking at what's produced by Australians. You can fix that by making it gross national product or net national product. And there's an argument that looking at income gives you a more accurate reflection on how it impacts people. So net national income, it has been argued, could be a better metric of how an economy is actually doing. And this is another little piece of, take it how you will, negative news here. Real NNI, so net national income, NNI, arguably a better measure than GDP, minus 2.5% in the September quarter. So that's a bit of a worry. And if you do it per capita, adjust with population, minus 2.7. Now, I'm not trying to be a Cassandra about this. The world's not ending. But it gives you pause. These stats aren't as pretty as they looked at first glance. So thus ends my little rant about national accounts for today. Look, I do want to then dive quickly into the next topic, which is, okay, I apologize. I did want to touch on this really quickly. I know I keep saying that. The ABS also showed that there's higher rates of education than ever. Look, I'm just going to make a throwaway comment, and I hope I can get back to this another week. We probably have too much education in Australia, especially university education. Now, that might sound a little strange. You know, education is supposed to be the panacea. It's supposed to be the solution for everything. Education does have a fairly good return on investment, right? When you factor in all the benefits to the person being educated and to society at large, it does have a fairly good average return on investments. But that's not the relevant measure. Right? That measures everyone who's been educated. What matters is the marginal return on education, like the most recent person to go to university. And there's pretty good evidence that the marginal return on education now is about 0, which means too many people are going to university. And the last, I don't know what percentage of people probably should go and do something else more productive with their life. So that's, this is constantly written up as if education is just obviously an infinite good. It's a nice thing, but it doesn't have just infinite value, infinite marginal value without any decreasing marginal returns. Everything has decreasing marginal value. I hesitate to say, I'm sure there's a counterexample, but nearly everything does and education does. So yes, we've got higher education, especially for women. Is it 2 million, is it 1 million females reported having a postgraduate qualification compared to 830,000 men. Now, I'm here to talk to you about economics and politics, not this sociology stuff. But I do find it interesting to note in dating sites, women invariably want to date a man with higher education, and men don't really care. So men are happy to date down educationally, women don't want to date down. So I do wonder how we're going to square this circle. If more and more women are more educated than men, but don't want to date men that are less educated than them, I'm not sure who they're going to date. But I am not a woman, so this is not my problem. And I'm happily married, so it's doubly not my problem. Anyway, just throwing that out there. Let's get into this energy policy. The coal and gas prices to be capped as National Cabinet strikes a deal. I'm just going to read some of this and then we'll start pontificating as we go. The nation's leaders have taken the extraordinary step of temporarily capping the prices of gas and coal as the war in Ukraine continues to shock global markets after a meeting of National Cabinet. So note straight away they're blaming Ukraine. Prime Minister Anthony Albanese said Parliament would be recalled next week to pass legislation. All right. They're going to cap the price. I'm paraphrasing now, just jumping ahead. Cap the price of gas at $12 per gigajoule and coal at $1.25 per ton. Price caps, basically. We're looking at price controls. Now, the interesting thing here, the first question to ask is it going to work? And there's two different answers because we're looking at coal and gas, and the situation for the two different sectors is somewhat different. It's probably going to work in the short term for gas. It'll achieve what they want in the short term and potentially create massive costs in the long term. So that's maybe a dumb idea. For coal, it's not even clear it's going to work. And to understand that, look, the energy sector, the electricity sector it's a messy one. There are so many government agencies and quangos. There's more than I'd be able to. I certainly can't remember them off the top of my head. I think I wrote a list of 20 or 30 recently and just put them up as a list and said, make sense of this. All these different regulators and sub-regulators, mini regulators, and macro regulators. It is a mess. But to summarize as best I can without a whiteboard, with the electricity sector, especially with coal-fired power, which still makes up the majority of our electricity, the plurality at least, of our electricity in Australia. So there's several levels along the supply chain. And the interesting thing is to look at which part of the supply chain they're addressing here and which part creates the problems and which parts we're able to influence. So firstly, you have the coal miners. They get the coal. They then generally don't turn it into electricity. They sell it to the electricity generators, the people who own the coal-fired power stations. They then sell it on the wholesale spot market. Now, you could say that's a market, that's not another sector, but the wholesale spot market is very much a government-managed market. Spot market kind of implies it's freely floating, and it does freely float, but the way it's coordinated is very much run by the bureaucrats. So basically, you send it through a bureaucratic system to get it from the electricity generators, and that gets it to the electricity retailers. And then the retailers sell it to you and me. All right, so the coal, the electricity, the bureaucrats, the retailers, and then the consumers. And what the government's doing here is they're trying to make it cheaper to get the coal from the coal miner to the electricity generator. Right, so it's not getting the electricity cheaper to the retailer or you straight away. They're hoping that's what'll happen. But that's the part of the puzzle that they're working on there. They're trying to get the coal cheaper from the coal miner to the coal-fired power station. And they're doing that by introducing a cap of $125 per ton. Now, why are they doing that? One of the drivers of higher prices, electricity prices around the world, has been, as they hinted at here, as they suggest is the whole story, has been the war in the Ukraine. Or just Ukraine now, they don't say the, I believe. Well, the war in Ukraine. And this has put upward pressure on the price of coal internationally. Now, why does that impact us? We're not in Ukraine. We're nowhere near it. We sell coal on the international markets. So if the price goes up in the international markets, we would shift all our coal there. So we are then a price taker because we trade. And you might say, well, that's terrible, right? That means international effects can drive up the price of our electricity. And yes, you could see it as a negative, and there are negatives, but coal is our largest export. I mean, Australia makes a lot of money by selling coal. You would not want to give that up lightly. So anyway, this means the international markets have pushed up the price of coal, the international price of coal. And so the government's worried that this pushes up the price of coal being sold to coal-fired power generators, and that feeds through to the rest of us. There's some truth to that. One of the difficulties and one of the reasons why this may not work is most coal-fired power stations already have long-term contracts. Right? Firstly, they might have long-term contracts, or they're already buying coal that wasn't destined for international markets. If those are the case, then the problem doesn't really apply to them. And that's most coal-fired power stations. So Errorang is a notable exception. There is one. There's the largest coal-fired power station in Australia, based in New South Wales. They still use the prices coming from the coal industry. But most of our power, this isn't going to apply to. If you're already getting coal for $100 a ton, and the government says it can't be more than 125, yeah, sure, fine, whatever. I'm only paying 100. Doesn't make any difference. So look, it can make some difference at the edges because of Errorang, as I mentioned before, and potentially some other edge cases. But when it comes to coal, it looks like the government is addressing the wrong part of the problem, and they're doing it in a way that doesn't really do anything or doesn't do much. I mean, what it does do is it gives a nice big handout to Errorang, right? So that coal-fired power station in New South Wales, they were going to do tough because they didn't have a long-term contract. And so it looks like the Labor government particularly likes that power station and wants to give them a big bailout. So that's sweet of them. But it doesn't look like it's going to do much. Now, gas is a bit different. Gas, it is more likely that this cap is going to put downward pressure on the price, going from the creation of the gas miners or whatever it's called, the gas producers and the users of gas to create electricity. So that'll work a bit better. But coal is the primary source of our base power in this country. And coal is cheaper than gas. Coal power is cheaper than gas power. So the short version here, I'd say it's unlikely to work with regards to coal. It'll work a little bit with regards to gas, but even then, here's the problem there. All right, so it's going to effectively force the gas industry to sell their gas cheaper. What would you do if you were in the gas industry and that happened? Right, so it's going to achieve that first order effect. That's the first order effect that they want to get. Force them to sell it for cheaper. But you can't force them to actually produce. And we've already seen this. We've already seen some producers coming out and saying that they are going to consider, or they are going to scale back their level of production. But it gets worse than that, because that's the second order effect. But there's a third order effect, and that is the political risk. And this is an issue that invariably lefties always underestimate or just don't think of at all. And that's this issue. If you're an investor and there's a project that you could invest in, and it only makes sense if you get 10% return, and you do the numbers, and look, you expect to get 10% return. So you think, hallelujah, this is good. I'll do it. I'll take the risk. I'll borrow the money. I'll put in the effort, and you invest with 10% return. And then a year later, a bureaucrat comes along, changes the rules, and ruins your industry. What people start to do is they factor in a thing called political risk premium. The political risk premium, which is to say that you need to start factoring in the risk of a future politician or bureaucrat ruining your business. And you might see this investment in the future, and it's 10% return on the business case. That's great, 10% return, I'll do that. And then you think, but there's a 20% chance a politician will ruin it. So your expected value now is only an 8% return. But don't worry about the details of the maths, just trust me, it's now less than 10 because you have to factor in the risk. And when you factor in the risk, it's an 8% return, and it might not be worth doing. And that's the part where it really starts to hurt everyone, because it's sad for the investor. They don't get to make money. I'd like people to make money. I don't think we should pride ourselves on wanting to rip down rich people, but that's not the point, really. The point from an economic perspective is when they don't go ahead with that investment, we now have less investment. That business doesn't exist. That business doesn't hire people. More to the point, that business doesn't produce things that we want. And in the case of gas, that's producing the gas that drives down the long-term gas price and electricity price. We want that. Right? So when you drive up the political risk premium, it's something you don't see the effect of it immediately. What you do, though, is you put a depressing hand pushing down the incentive to invest in this country or in this sector running forward. And political risk premium is a massive issue in the electricity sector. It is really holding back investments that we need in the energy sector writ large. And what this does here with this gas price cap, you might get a short-term reduction in production, which probably just puts upward pressure on price and undoes the benefit. But you also get new political risk, which means less investment, less long-term production. So this could really end up biting us. So the coal side probably just won't even work or will hardly work. On the gas side, it might work. This first order effect, they say yay, but as soon as the second and third order effects come in, this is not necessarily going to be a good thing. So what do we do? I mean, this is like, I think it's fair to say, and look, you don't have to answer the what do you do answer. It could just be nothing. But I think it's fair to say this solution does not look like it's been properly thought through. Right? Labor's policy does not look like it's been properly thought through. It doesn't look like it's going to make this country better off. But then what can we do? And look, you don't have to do something. There's this, the old joke of, I think it's from Yes Minister, something must be done, this is something, therefore this must be done. It's a very dangerous attitude. It's a very common attitude amongst politicians and unfortunately amongst many people in the voting public. This desire that the government must do something, even if it makes things worse. They just need to be seen to be acting. They need to run back and forth with a clipboard so they look busy. They need to start a new project or a new institute or a new bureaucracy or a new program so that they look busy. I understand the instinct, but I'd say, and this is a crucial distinction between us free market types and the people who have more faith in government. I think the government should only intervene when their actions are going to improve society. Now, as I say that, you might find yourself nodding, and I hope you do, because I hope you agree, but that actually is not the norm when we look at how politics runs in this country. Right? There is very much, there is a problem, you have to act. It doesn't matter if it helps, you have to do something, even if nothing can be done, even if what you do will make things worse. It's a very common instinct in this country. So I'd love to go back and stress, it might be that there is nothing that can be done. And we shouldn't shy away from considering that. But having said all that, I do have I instinctively want to say a modest proposal, but we'll see how modest it ends up being. Now, there is a couple of things to consider with the energy market, and that is there's the short-term issue and the long-term issue. The short-term issue is everyone wants to pay less now for their electricity bills. I understand that. Unfortunately, most of the solutions are long-term solutions. Fundamentally, the solution is a cheaper supply, which comes from we need more cheaper inputs, so cheaper coal, cheaper gas, or cheaper wind and sun, although those happen naturally if you want to go down that path, or cheaper uranium. So cheaper inputs, and then we need more investment in electricity generation. And that's what we've really suffered from because of, as I was talking about before, the political risk premium means that no one wants to invest in politically sensitive types of electricity generation. And as Tim notes here, and as others noted last week, nuclear as well. So that's we've got impediments to nuclear. So that's not just political risk premium there. That's actually just not allowing it. Although realistically, coal-fired power is likely cheaper than nuclear at the moment. But look, we'll see. We'll see as it goes forward. The technology is always changing, and we'll work it out as we go. So the long-term solution is you need cheaper inputs and more investment in electricity generation. And we can quibble, we can say that nuclear is the cheapest, legalize it and have that. Some people will say renewables are cheaper. Look, it's true that if you've already got all the other parts of the puzzle sorted, renewables like wind and solar don't have an input cost. You don't need to buy the coal, you don't need to buy the uranium. You just need wind, which happens naturally, and sun, which happens naturally. So there is a fairly low cost for renewables there. The problem, of course, is with renewables, for it to be a sustainable energy source, you need storage, right? Because when the wind's not blowing, you need to be able to store when the wind blows a lot, you need to be able to store half of it and use it later. And that is a difficult question with electricity. And so we might not have that solved. But if you think nuclear is cheaper, fine, legalize it. We need more investment there. If you think renewables and storage is cheaper, great, allow it, have more investment there. If you think, which I think is probably the case, that coal-fired power is still cheaper, great, allow it and have more investment there. But we're not seeing any investment there because of the political risk premium. So the long-term solution is cheaper inputs, more investment, fix the political risk premium issue. So with that in mind, now the difficulty with that still, the political difficulty, is even if that was all done, it would really only address the issue in 2 years' time. It takes a while to build an electricity generator, right? It takes a while to do these things. So people want to see cheaper energy today, so cheaper electricity today. So here's my suggestion. I haven't really workshopped this with anyone. So you guys are sitting at home listening in, you are my test audience. Let me know what you think of this in the comments. The reason the price is high now is because of the price in the wholesale market, right? Changing the price from the coal miner to the coal-fired power station. That's not the trick. The trick is we need to change the price from the energy producer through to the retailers. And if we can drop that price, the price in the wholesale market, then they'll pass that price on to us. So just going back here, having a look at what the problem was. Let's see. This is the spot price in the wholesale electricity market. And you can see here it was bumbling along, and then it spiked here in 2022. So that's the source of the problem. That's where we need the solution. So my suggestion, and it's not a pure libertarian one, so for the Puritans at home, get ready to throw your shoe. But the government proposes to the electricity generators the following deal. You will send through electricity onto the wholesale market at cost, with no markup, with no profit. You'll do that at cost, and the quid pro quo is that you will be able to write off your investments against tax. Right? You'll be able to tax-free reinvested profits, or potentially a accelerated depreciation or instant asset write-off, something like that. Something that basically is a tax cut that incentivizes further investment in infrastructure. So I like the idea of tax-free reinvested profits. I like that idea for all industries. I think that's what we should have. I think we should make reinvested profits tax-free for everyone, but we don't have it for everyone yet. So this is a partial solution here. We incentivize the electricity generators to pass through electricity on the wholesale market for cheaper, and the quid pro quo is they get this tax-free reinvested profits to reinvest in future electricity generation. And at the same time, we add regulatory compensation, which I've talked about last week. The idea there is that any investment taken by these electricity generators here, so they drop their price, they reinvest their profits in a new piece of electricity generation, a new piece of capital, piece of infrastructure. They got regulatory compensation in that if any future regulation undermines the value of that investment, they have to be compensated. So this is trying to address, that second part is trying to address the issue of the political risk premium, of people knowing this is a good idea, it makes sense, I want to do it, but I'm scared of a future government screwing it up for me. So introduce regulatory compensation. So that's the three parts of that. They sell at a cheaper price today, incentivized by being able to reinvest their company profits tax-free, and they get regulatory compensation for those investments that they make with that reinvested profit. And what that would do is it would create an incentive to put a little downward pressure on the current spot market. So it would give us some immediate relief because they would be selling onto the wholesale market at a cheaper price. That would go on to retailers. There is fairly good competition in the electricity retail sector. And so that would come through to consumers and we would benefit. So we would benefit some in the short term, but also would be helping to address the long-term issue by incentivizing further investment in electricity generation. So that's my pitch for a potential way forward on this. And by the way, it's discussed less these days, but we should remove the renewable energy target. So the renewable energy target requires electricity retailers to buy some of their electricity in an inefficient and overpriced way. They have to pass on that higher price to us. So if you just remove that requirement, this is a separate idea, right? Just remove the RET, remove the renewable energy target, and we should see our prices go down a little bit that way as well. So that's my pitch. You tell me what you think, or don't tell me what you think, as the case may be. What have we got here? I've got one answer from Tim, which I appreciate. So if everyone wants to agree with Tim, then I will gladly put up your comments. Look, if you just tell me that too. Comments coming through here from Alexander. This is a bit long for me to read. Well, yeah, you don't want to be creating moral hazard for people making bad decisions as well. That's on the gas side. Look, I think the coal side is what I've been focusing on because that is the fundamental, that is the producer of our baseload power, the majority of our baseload power. The Greens want zero compensation to coal gas, so it won't pass. Look, most things I'd say wouldn't pass. I guess it's easy to tear down ideas, and I spent a good time in this chat tearing down Labor's idea. I wanted to provide something, some sort of idea as a counterbalance. And look, where is the compensation to coal and gas in this? I guess they would think the tax cuts. Yeah, they're allowing them to reinvest company profits tax-free. Well, I'd say, look, long term, I think all company profits that are reinvested should be tax-free because that incentivizes more reinvestment. And as I mentioned before, the only long-term drivers of greater prosperity, innovation, and investment. Look, I've rabbited on about this long enough. I was going to get to a few other things. I've noticed I've already hit the 40-minute mark. And I want to definitely make sure I do these in under an hour going forward. I know I don't always pass, and I appreciate your tolerance, those who stick around. But before I move on, well, maybe I just will move on, come back to some of the questions soon, but waiting patiently in the wings has been my partner in crime here at the Australian Taxpayers Alliance. And see if I can get him in here. Barclay McGain. Barclay, can you hear me?
Certainly can. Thank you, John. Can you hear me all right?
I can hear you well, yes. So you've been waiting patiently in the back, I saw there. You ducked in a bit early. Did you hear that pitch, the idea that I was presenting?
Yeah, no, exactly. And I 100% agree. And I think the Australian Taxpayers Alliance and, of course, a whole lot of other like-minded organisations really need to push hard on Labor and their agenda, particularly when it comes to things like price caps on energy as well, because cost of living and things like power prices are really a challenging time for most people around Australia. So I think it's a great point you raised, yeah.
And I should say to everyone, we work together, but we didn't plan this beforehand, and we don't pay him to agree. Indeed, I think you should get a work bonus when you argue with us. I think that's probably the way it works. Did you have in any of that any other thoughts on how well the government scheme is likely to work or not work? And if that's not going to work, if I'm right in my suspicions that the coal side mostly won't work and the gas side will backfire, are there any other ways forward?
I don't think there are. No, I was listening and I just felt myself just casually nodding to a lot of what you're saying. And no, I think you're spot on with it. But it's not really the only hurrah that they've got. One thing that we were talking about recently, I did an appearance on TNT Radio last week talking about how it's not just in this space where the government are looking to involve themselves in the energy sector. They've also had massive payouts to the renewables lobby in the form of green vehicles, renewable energy vehicles. And not only that, but massive amounts of subsidies to the Great Barrier Reef, despite the fact, and I was listening to Peter Ridd recently, that we've seen record coal growth on the Great Barrier Reef. So it's all in the name of climate change. It's all packaged up like that. But the ending result is going to be high power prices and less freedom for all individuals, I think. So.
Yeah, I got to say, I've just sidelined the whole issue of climate change in this discussion. You mentioned it briefly last week, but I'm just starting this discussion with the assumption that we want cheap electricity. At this point, previously people could have a theoretical discussion about whether climate or cheap electricity is a higher priority. Once the prices start going up and people start feeling it, then all politicians need to end up having a serious discussion about how to get those prices down. So that's
definitely, yeah. I think the analogy that comes to mind is, and I don't know if I've just created this in my mind, but it's tap dancing on a sinking ship. And there's a lot of issues that we've got right now where it's a completely sinking ship. There's an issue I want to segue onto just in a moment, which is another instance. You know, you've got people going overboard, you've got water flowing on board, there's a massive storm overhead. But hey, there's a guy tap dancing. Hey, have a look at that. And that seems to be what the government continued trying to spin for all of us to focus on. And another big issue is housing. And that's one thing that I think it's really come under the microscope recently in New South Wales. We had the state Liberal government who have announced that they're going to be against or that they're making laws to forbid rental bidding. We've kind of spoken about it a little bit, the ATA. What's your kind of take on that scenario, John?
Yeah, so I did mention that at the beginning that we were going to talk about it. So perfect timing. It was the issue I wanted to bring up to you. So, and again, this is unscripted. I have no idea what he's about to say, and nor so we can ask each other cheeky questions. And if you want to get us in trouble, ask one of us to ask the other a cheeky question someday. I'm sure we're both evil enough to do it. Look, I did note that they're not banning bidding. So the issue is if you want to rent a place. Someone's asking for $300 a week. You go and you look at the place you wanted. You put in a contract. If lots of people are bidding on that place, you might not get it. One thing that some tenants do is they then overbid. So they ask for $300 a week, and you bid $320, $350 a week. It's because you really want it and you want to beat out everyone else that's trying to get the place. So that is actually still going to be allowed. So what they're banning is the agents encouraging people to overbid. So I suspect this is a lot of show. I don't think this is about anything. Like so much in politics, I think this is an example. I said before that yes, minister line, something must be done. This is something. This must be done. I don't think there's any there.
Well, it's exactly as I was saying before, tap dancing on a sinking ship. And we know that the sinking ship analogy, the sinking ship in this analogy is the supply issue for housing. And you know, so what you basically got on an average weekend in Sydney and, you know, where I'm from on the Gold Coast, we've got 98% occupancy rates for rental properties. You've got an average rental property which is going to market and 30 people are applying to be the new tenant. Now, the government, and in this case, the New South Wales State Labor government, you know, one person is going to get that property out of 30. Now, the state government wants you to think that the number one issue in that scenario is the fact that the one person out of those 30 is going to pay an extra $10 for the rental property that they're looking to move into, as opposed to the other 29 who are completely missing out. They want you to believe that one person is the bigger issue, and it simply does not add up. It's all about spin. And another aspect of it is a complete blight on the freedom to negotiate. You know, I saw, you know, there was a media release that came out from Dominic Perrottet and the New South Wales Liberal Party. And, you know, we've got a lot of, you know, laws around in Australia about, you know, banning hate speech, banning speech that's intimidating or inciting violence or inciting hysteria. But adding to that list of prohibited words that we're now able to use is by negotiation, inviting offers, and a price range. So taboo are they that the Liberal government is looking at outlawing them. And really, you know, I think you touched on it before, that we should just look at this as something as, you know, they're just trying to say, hey, we care about the housing issue while doing something completely unrelated to it. And let's be clear, Labor are no better. They've come out and said that it doesn't go far enough. And that, in fact, we need a rental commissioner to look into this. So, you know, all we're going to see is landlords leave the market, and with that in turn puts more pressure on supply. And instead of those 30 people applying for that one rental property, you're going to end up with 45, 50. So definitely not good news in New South Wales. And the sad thing is it's bipartisan. Yeah, look, I mostly agree with that. I do note that this policy, in terms of sharing the blame, it already exists in Queensland, Victoria, and I think one other state. So it's quite a common idea. I agree. It's both pointless and a little absurd telling people what they can and can't say to each other. I do think I'll push back on one thing. When I first heard the idea and I thought they were just disallowing auctions, I thought that might, first they would just change the way people announce the price. They could just run reverse auctions. I don't know if anyone hasn't thought of that yet. But an auction, you start at a low price and bid each other up. A reverse auction, you start with an implausibly high price, and the price just keeps going down until someone says stop, and then they've effectively bid the highest price that way. So reverse auction, also known as a Dutch auction, because that's how they used to sell tulips in the Netherlands hundreds of years ago. So that's the first thing is if they banned normal auctions, they just find a different way to advertise rental prices. But then you're potentially right. If that's what they were doing, if it ended up depressing prices, then it would simply create less incentive for people to put their properties on the market, less supply, which is the exact opposite of what we need. So I take your point there. However, given that this doesn't even ban the bidding, it doesn't actually ban the auction, I think it's mostly just for show and will have nearly no impact. So I think if it did have an impact, it would be negative. But I think the redeeming feature of this stupid policy is that it's so stupid it has no impact. That's the redeeming feature. Look, and if it's going to have no impact, you shouldn't ban people from saying words to each other. I agree with you on that one. I do note some of the language you were using is similar to what Real Estate Institute of New South Wales, Tim McKibben, has said. The nice little quote here, a couple of quotes from him.
If you had 30 people attend an open home with the hope of being able to acquire that property, regardless of how much rent they pay, there's still going to be 29 people who have not been able to find a home. The only solution to this problem is additional supply, and the government has failed to increase the supply of rental property in our market. Absolutely spot on by Tim McKibben, and absolutely spot on by the ATA's only own in the game. So yes, I think that is the odd thing about the housing discussion is both sides of politics so desperately need to be seen to be doing something. But the one thing they could actually do to help, which is help to drive up supply, they're MIA. They just don't seem to be interested in the real discussion. They're only interested in the tap dancing. As you said, your wonderful analogy earlier, the tap dancing. I left that open for you, but it sounds like you have no comment on the end.
No. Sorry. Hey, I'm just actually having a read of that piece there. I actually saw Tim McKibben on Sky the other night. I think he was speaking with Tom O'Connell, and he had some great points to raise. So he's someone we should definitely get in touch with, see if we can do an event with him, perhaps. I don't know.
Yeah, that could work. Ashley asks, look, I think this is an astute question. I don't know if he's being cheeky. Should the government be building commie blocks? Now, if people know me or Barclay or the instincts of the ATA, you'd know that we don't instinctively think the government should be doing very much, especially getting involved in areas that can be done in the private sector. However, I got to say on this one, like I don't think they should, but I just want to give the devil his due. At least suggestions of saying the government builds commie blocks, government builds housing. I don't think it's the best way forward, but at least it's addressing the actual issue. Right? At least it's not totally looking in the wrong direction, talking about people's shoe size and their favorite toppings on pizza, which is just irrelevant to the issue, as is this idea of banning people talking about rental bidding. So the issue is supply. And to the credit of people who want the government to simply build the houses, I think there's a better way of doing it. But to their credit, at least that would increase supply. Right? So that's, one star, one tick in that direction. It is better than the solutions that just play around on demand side or try to police people's language.
And I think, we're all juxtaposing this against the even more radical policies which some of the Greens are proposing, which is a complete rental freeze. And that is on, I don't even think that's just on a statewide level. I think it's on a nationwide level, which I think, that would have untold consequences. We haven't even looked at costing something like that at the AT, but gee, that would be disastrous.
Yeah, so that's, you can always rely on the Greens to come up with a bunch of stupid policies. They also have the policy of just the government building houses. So they aren't wrong there, but then the rental freeze, I don't know if they've thought that through. Most poor people rent. Realistically, most poor people aren't buying their third townhouse in I'm trying to think of a rich person's suburb, Des Moines or whatever it's going to be. So if most poor people rent, and what you do is decrease the supply of rental property, which, going after real estate investors, landlords would do that. You just hurt renters. It's weird what the Greens do sometimes. They really seem to end up hurting the people that they pretend they like. Let's see, Stephen Patton, sorry, apologies. Patton, the Greens spending their time shutting down some sort of towers, high-density apartment building in the railway station in a nice area of Melbourne, and then complaining about lack of supply. Yes, they're also notorious NIMBYs. Although, to be fair, again, and this isn't in defense of the Greens, it's in condemnation of pretty much all parties. Most parties have a bit of a NIMBY streak, right? They all understand it's the wrong thing to do until they realize some NIMBY voters are the marginal swing voters that'll determine their electorate. So you get that a lot across the board, I find.
Yeah. Another thing that, I think is a major factor is you look at some of the areas, where I'm living in Brisbane, like New Farm, West End, those kind of suburbs. It isn't the traditional, like Greens base, which is all about the climate, vegan living, that kind of thing. It's people looking to protect their property prices and really be against development. So that kind of NIMBY streak. And they're the kind of people that are drifting towards the Greens in a lot of these really built up areas where people are looking to protect their property prices. And that's causing a lot of the housing supply issues, I think, as well. A lot of those people voting for those policies on a local government level. Yeah.
Just to play more devil's advocate here and maybe argue somewhat against myself and you, because I like arguing with you. there is an awkward issue of property rights here in that if a community came together and built some houses and had as part of the sale of those houses the idea of the amenity around it, and they got together in some sort of contract and said, let's all agree on our street, we all have our houses looking like this. And they sold the houses on that basis. People bought the houses on that basis. They chose to live there on that basis. The price of the properties changed on that basis. And then someone comes in and says, replace all these houses with a high rise. There could be a property rights issue in that if they've done everything voluntarily up to that point to get the amenities they want, there is something of a property related catch-22. I actually think that there's some good work done by a former Cato housing economist. His name escapes me at the moment, but he points out that the better solution to increase the supply is to allow more what people derisively call urban sprawl. He argues that allowing cities to expand out is the common feature of cities that have been able to successfully maintain low property prices, such as many that exist in Texas. So that's something to consider.
Yeah.
Now, you got a question here coming in for you, Barclay, from Alexander. My electorate went green, and that was really based on lots of renters moving into the area.
Yeah, right. Okay. Yeah, I know Alexander Wynn is a good friend of mine, actually.
You're not supposed to admit that here. So if we don't pretend we don't know, then it looks like lots of strangers showing up instead of just being our mums and neighbours.
Yeah, I don't know. I'm trying to think what state electorate that would be. That'd probably be. Yeah, South Brisbane, I guess. Yeah. So, yeah, it's interesting. A lot of particularly in Brisbane, we've got 3 federal MPs that are Greens now. So it's this is in many ways the Greens' heartland of the country. I think. Yeah.
Well, I mean, there's plenty in inner city Melbourne now in the Victorian election. They seem to be taking over the inner cities. I've just noticed we've tipped over to 59, coming up to an hour. And I have once again failed to end this chat within an hour because there was one more topic I wanted to get to. And look, you'd be a good one to stick around, Barclay, if you want. I think you have to duck off though, don't you?
Yeah, I've got to head off. Yeah, no, thank you so much, John. It was great to come on and chat, and I love listening to all your ATA Econ chats. Thank you.
Cheers, Barclay. Chat soon.
Cheers.
Now that Barclay's gone, I should fix the name. And one last thing I wanted to chat about is switching gears a little bit into politics, this interesting follow-up to something I was discussing last week, and that was the New South Wales Liberals not allowing some seemingly popular candidates to stand as candidates. It looks like there's been a fallout from that, so an interesting political fallout in the New South Wales, in the lead up to the New South Wales state election, which could get spicy. So there's been this idea basically is, and lots of people have been talking about sort of a right-wing Teals. Other people, since the Teals were somewhat successful at the federal election, lots of people have got this renewed viv and vigor to try and pursue a career in independent politics. A lot of come and gone, not all that serious. This one looks a bit more serious, so this could be interesting. This is, yes, Melissa, this is the Change 200 set up by, this, I believe, is Matt Camanzuli. Used to be on the New South Wales State Executive, I believe. I mean, I'm from Queensland, and I'm not active in the New South Wales Liberal Party or in the Liberal Party at all. But so I believe this is correct, but insiders might be able to correct me. I believe he was on the New South Wales State Executive of the Liberal Party, and he was a big backer of the idea of plebiscites, like a free vote of members of the party to determine who their candidates would be. I believe that's the law of the laws in the rules in the party now of New South Wales Liberals, but the New South Wales State Executive keeps finding a way around it. So Scott Morrison or the political leaders keep finding a way to deny Liberal Party members their vote on who they want as their candidate, or some sort of funny games are going on in the background that I don't necessarily understand. And Matt Camanzuli has decided he's had enough of it, and he wants to form a breakaway group of independents. Or I don't know if he wants to, but he is willing to, unless the Liberals change their ways. So to quote from this article, a former high-ranking New South Wales Liberal is warning ongoing pre-selection games and chicanery could propel him to back Liberal-aligned independents. Millionaire Matthew Camanzuli has threatened to form an alliance of independents that would target seats like Epping and Hornsby, held by Premier Dom Perrottet and Treasurer Matt Keane. the ex-state executive member, there you go, I was right, who took former Prime Minister Scott Morrison to court over pre-selections ahead of the federal election, said he had a loyal and growing support base of members who felt the party was not listening, etc., etc. Feel free to go and find this. This is on ABC News. You should be able to Google that if you want to read the rest of it. But I believe the basic idea is to run a series of liberal-aligned or liberal-ish or liberal-sympathetic independents in the New South Wales state election, and to see if that can. I believe his goal is to try and jolt the Liberal Party back to what he says is what they're supposed to be. So that looks like it could be an interesting new development in the New South Wales scene. We'll see what comes from that as we go forward. The other news coming out of the New South Wales election, as we discussed at the very beginning of this hour, is that the Shooters Party at the beginning of this year in New South Wales had 2 members of the upper house and 3 members of the lower house. So they were quite a force in New South Wales state politics. At the beginning of this year, they lost one of their lower house representatives, Helen Dalton, I think, went independent. And just a few days ago, they've lost the other 2. So it now looks like all of the Shooters' lower house candidates have gone independent, and all of them plan on running as independents at the upcoming New South Wales state election. So that's, I have no idea, by the way, if those former Shooters have been talking to Matt Kamanzuli. That's, I was doing those as 2 separate stories. Since they're ex-Shooters, not ex-Liberals, I'm not sure how much crossover there is, but that's for other people to work out. But it looks like there's a few extra twists in the tail of this New South Wales state election. Look, as you know, as I've said before, a lot of people pay close attention to the horse race at the top, Liberal Labor, the fight for Premier, the fight for Prime Minister. Hugely important. I don't mean to downplay that at all. I also think it's very important to keep an eye on who has balance of power. Because a lot of the major party politicians, they're very worried about who gets the bigger chairs, who gets the bigger hats, who gets the bigger pay packet. And you can understand, you'd prefer to be Prime Minister or Premier than opposition leader. But legislation only passes if it goes through the parliaments, the lower and upper house. And you only get that if you can work through the balance of power parties. So if you are just worried about the fancy hats and who gets the bigger press releases and media scrums, sure, the Prime Minister and Premier. But if you want legislation to pass, we need to be keenly interested in which parties have the balance of power. And the most obvious place for parties other than the sitting government to have balance of power is in the upper house. So, for instance, at the moment in New South Wales, the government, the Liberal government in New South Wales, Dominic Perrottet is the Premier from the Liberal Party. They need 22 votes, I believe it is, to pass legislation in the upper house. So the Liberal Party can pass most legislation through the lower house. It's a minority government, but they've got friendly independents. They can pass it through the lower house. To pass it through the upper house, they need the support of One Nation and the Shooters, I believe, and Fred Nile, who's now sitting there as an independent. So I find that's quite interesting to keep an eye on the balance of power in those areas. If the focus is just power, fine, watch the main horse race. But if the focus is getting good policy through, then it is urgently important that everybody, including the major parties, right? I'm surprised the Liberal and Labor Party aren't more eagerly involved in courting some of these balance of power parties. Everyone needs to keep a close eye on where the balance of power is going to be. So the other story, just deviating states, but staying on that topic, the Victorian state election has come and gone. I said last week, I was hoping that we'd be talking about the final results today. We aren't talking about the final results because those are coming out tomorrow morning. So maybe I'll do an extra quick live stream sometime tomorrow to have a quick chat about that. We don't yet know. We know that Fiona Patten has conceded defeat. It looks like Adam Somyurek is taking that spot. So the DLP will be part of the balance of power in the Victorian upper house. Although it does look like Dan Andrews is going to have enough left-friendly minor parties with balance of power. So it looks like it'll be the Greens and the Cannabis Party and the Animals that will have that balance of power. And this is why it's so crucial to keep an eye on these upper houses and this fight for the balance of power. It seems esoteric. I know I've got a personal interest because I've been involved in minor party politics a long time. But even if you abstract from that, I think it's accurate to say that it really does matter. And the media and us political commentators do need to keep a close eye on it going forward. both tomorrow morning. So keep an eye out. Keep an eye out for the news. The Victorian final results for the Victorian Upper House will be announced tomorrow morning. And yes, as Melissa says, keeping the fingers crossed for David Limbrick of the Liberal Democrats. He's seeking re-election in Southeast Metro. No way of knowing at this point. We just have to wait and see until they press the button tomorrow morning. So keep an eye out for that. And then once Victoria is firmly in our rearview mirror, the New South Wales state election and the fight there for government is one thing, and then for balance of power is worth keeping an eye on. So please do. With that said, I have gone well over my hour mark yet again. I should be admonished, and I will endeavor to try and make these a little bit quicker going forward. Next week is our Christmas edition, and there may be a break. But at this point, I should remind you all, please, if you haven't yet liked this video, if you haven't yet, please subscribe, go and check out, go and find, search for it, open up YouTube and go and search John Humphreys, Australian Taxpayers. There's three different things. John Humphreys, Australian Taxpayers Alliance, The Good Source. You can find this show on all three. Please get on YouTube, go and subscribe there, go and find me on Rumble, follow me on Facebook. And with that said, I look forward to seeing you again next week, Tuesday, 7 p.m. my time, 8 p.m. for you Southerners. That's it from me. Thank you.
Hey, DJ, what do you think of the budget?
Budget naughty.
Yeah, budget naughty.